With the publication of Poems of Affinity, in many ways what we see is an affirmation of the continuities of Carter's poetry. As readers, though, of Carter, we've often been keen to see divisions in his work. So from political poetry to a turn away from politics, from optimism to despair, from a public poet to a private writer. When I met him for the first time, he gave me a spare copy that he had of Poems of Affinity. It was already then, I think, a rare book to find. And when I turned the book over and looked at the back cover, he'd written something there. And I think it tells us something about these ideas of division that maybe he was thinking about. So in his handwriting were these words: "The public and the private are distinguishable, but not separable." And he'd also underlined some words from a Camo Brathwaite quotation. "But with Martin Carter, how can we know the dancer from the dance?" And under those words, he'd written subject dash action. We are our actions, and our actions make us, maybe. They might be distinguishable, but they're not separable. And I'm tempted to say that this wish to kind of overcome diverse forms of separation is also at the heart of the collection Poems of Affinity. Affinity is such a powerful word, I think, for Carter to use at this stage in his writing life. And if we think of the main collections, we have Resistance, Succession, and then Affinity. And like Resistance and Succession, the word affinity holds positional implications. Its roots lie in a Latin verb, which mean to border or end or limit. In an interview with Frank Verbal Singh, Carter explained the poetic importance of affinity. He said, "Everything borders with something else. When you speak to me about something, I usually see it one way, then in another in one flat second. And that is what I'm trying to do, to deal with two things simultaneously, not separately." To see things simultaneously is maybe to catch their complexity, to understand their contradictions, to appreciate how the world is connected. A collection entitled Poems of Affinity might suggest the poet's achievement of those kinds of connections, possibly even the achievement of a community where the ties between people and place form an ideal social unity. But Carter makes no such claim in this collection of poems. One way to read Poems of Affinity is as Carter's attempt to look for, to search out affinities that might be available in the world around him. What we get in this collection are riddles, maybe, questions and answers that encompass all sorts of things. One of them certainly is the idea of social confusion and social concern. In the poem Our Time, he asks, "Is it only just a misfortune to be as we are, bad luck, carefully chosen?" In Too Much Waiting, we have stark environmental questions. If trees die, what happens to caterpillars? Dialogue, connection, and disconnection are anticipated by these questions, but the boundaries of the exchange are not enforced, maybe can't even be anticipated. Carter's questions articulate a hope for affinity, a hope for closeness, a hope for understanding, in a world that the poet also must register that it is arbitrary and fragile. Since 1977, Carter had held the position of artist in residence at the University of Guyana, and this enabled him to concentrate on writing for the first time in his working life. This period is notable also for the friendships and affinities he forged. Raymond Mandel, a friend of Carter, was the founder of Release, the publisher of Poems of Affinity. He also gathered together Carter's manuscripts, and the manuscripts of this collection give us the insight into Carter's writing practices that we often don't have. One poem, Calendar, which was revised with the title Some Kind of Fury, comes with this note. Written in Raymond's house, where the spirit came, for Agnes and the children, from Martin, Phyllis, and my own children with love, I have learned how to refuse to be afraid. A draft of Anywhere was written on a Bristol filter cigarette packet, a draft of Beans of God on the back of an envelope, a draft of Inventor on a piece of exam paper. The manuscripts show a poet thinking expansively about inspiration and collaboration, writing wherever he can on whatever was available. And the book is a collaboration. The collection includes an introduction by Bill Carr and an appreciation by Stanley Greaves. Greaves's appreciation consists of line drawings around 21 poems of the 35. The main text of each poem in the collection is laid out on the right-hand pages of the book, with the title of each poem centered on the left-hand page. The effect is striking. Wherever the book is opened, a reader is faced with a single dense poem, often not more than 10 lines long, and many accompanied by a pen and ink drawing by Stanley Greaves. This period was also a politically and socially divisive time, and Carter felt obliged to return to the vocabulary of resistance that he had used in his earlier work. Release published a new edition of Poems of Resistance in 1979, and in the same year, Carter published an open letter to the people of Guyana in Day Clean, the publication of the WPA, calling for another kind of collaboration. The letter was a call for resistance to the PNC government to which he had once belonged, and he specifically used the word resistance against what he called the disrespect and degradation that he could not ignore. Who do we think we are? He asked at the end of the letter, and he answered his own question with the words, I sign my name, Martin Carter. Our Time is the first poem in Poems of Affinity, and its opening establishes Carter's method of questioning and answering. At the same time that he was writing this collection, Carter was also really interested in the nature and power of riddles. In his unpublished notes from 1979, he made a 12-point list entitled Dimensions of the Riddle, and the first point he makes is this. A riddle is the result of the effort to include the inclusible to bursting point. This rare word, inclusible, points to Carter's method in this period. He was building for himself, you could say, a model of writing that was defined by its pressurizing expressivity. If Carter viewed riddles as driving comprehensiveness to bursting point, his poetry of the later 1970s was pushing in that same direction. To return to Our Time, we open with a riddle-like statement that also maybe seems to operate like a proverb, offering wisdom as a statement where meaning is multiple and must be worked for by the listener. The more men of our time we are, the more our time is. And the rest of the poem acts like a kind of unraveling of the implications of this proverbial statement. But the following lines also don't provide any easy explanation. But always we have been somewhere else, muttering our mouths like holes in mud at the bottom of trenches, looking for what is not anywhere or certain. So the initial promise maybe of a heroic era is turned on its head, and instead we get expressions of displacement, inarticulacy, uncertainty. It's maybe an ironic variation on affinity and on Carter's assertion that everything borders with something else. Unpacking the phrase our time, the hope of common belonging or the desire to define a particular historical moment remain really powerful readings, but are also shown to be unrealistic. In the poem, commonality is negatively achieved. Badly abused, we fail to curse, our fury pleads. But who we should curse at or who our fury should plead to, Carter cannot or will not tell us. Our Time was one of 7 poems that Carter offered to the Georgetown Review, which was a new magazine edited by Anne Dyer, Brian Rodway, and Rupert Roopnarine. And it's worth noting that Carter leads up to that poem, Our Time. So it's the last poem in this sequence, whereas in Poems of Affinity, it launches the collection. Given the journal's aim to understand the economic, social, and political crisis in Guyana as they saw it, it's tempting to read these poems as engaging directly with these crises. So documentary, but documentary in Carter's way. We have Our Number and Rice, where Carter tackles the idea of food crisis. Social unrest is simmering in paying fares. The fragility of the environment is voiced in Rainforest. In Playing Militia, the criticism of the militarization of Guyanese youth is palpable. The poem Our Time then becomes the summation of Carter's material concerns, written as a riddle to solve together, but as we know from Carter's understanding of riddles, this won't be an easy task. Bill Carr, in his introduction to Poems of Affinity, describes Carter as writing with an abundant and angry humanism. I'm not sure if anger is the only emotion that we see in Our Time. Carter's humanism is critical, but it is always also constant. To rephrase Carter, his is an expansive humanism, always testing the limits of what is inclusible.
Our Time by Martin Carter. The more the men of our time we are, the more our time is. But always we have been somewhere else, muttering our mouths like holes in the mud at the bottom of trenches, looking for what is not anywhere or certain. Is it only a misfortune to be as we are? Bad luck? Carefully chosen? In parallel seasons, if rain is any hour, if trees abandon wind, what of the others? Badly abused, we fail to curse. Our fury pleads. Yet, fury should be fire, if not light. And what is the mother of fury, if not ours? For any man and for any time, one dream is enough. This is true. Playing Militia by Martin Carter. Even in that place of final exile among tombs and mechanical inscriptions, each leaf is a different green, flower a different kind of red and yellow, also each ripe fruit tumult of a really different seed there in that place. Outside in the traffic between the city's indifferent wheels and feet, amid a hatred of trees, the fallowed needles of sewing machines have sewn a new drill. The sleeves of uniforms droop like the wet feathers of a crow's wing over secret carrion. Girls, unbreasted, wear guns like earrings. Boys, ungamed, grip them like tickets. The spree is awake. Admission is free.
I still stare. Beyond a pattern of stars reserved for sundown. Beyond and through slats once closed, now open, I still stare. Time's fabulous fall down is the slope of a strange mountain, a shelf of books. Our hands have written. They will continue to write, all is the same. Title different, signature equal. Both are reserved for the time beyond sundown, through which, once closed, now open, I still stare.
As new and as old. Every day is as old as a new day is. Time represents itself. Night fakes the rule of stars as we fake light's good pencil, a child's chalk-ridden blackboard, alphabet of hope in a season of insects, crawl of the beast in a season of days. I, unapologetic, remember why every day was once a new day, as new and as old as my childhood roaming among grass. The world is a cold wind. It is a glass of sweet water in a grim place of thirst. Farewell, rain. When again shall I taste your high cloud? Having betrayed old gods in an old day, we seek now to betray new ones in a new day.
Our Number by Martin Carter. The pins of the slack pin seine irregular the horizon. The tide has gone them bare. A most disturbed seagull proportions a catch. The fisherman's wife, another seagull, leans on the sky counting shrimp. Surrendering ourselves, we denizen an epoch of abuse, trying to defy with the seagulls or sea wife's similar desperation the tide that naked skins us. Shrimp is our number, is so we state, is a way of counting born we.
With that blown. A tick on the flank of a beast is also a beast, as every answer creature of a question. In this world, time is a sneer, and I am masticated by its jaw. All I could have and have done was to borrow its tongue. With that loan, I have gained a mastery of the language of our negative yes.
A poem entitled Rainforest by Martin Carter. Every clear raindrop helps to obscure the green towers. Every grain of white sand, the specks of bright gold. These are of memory, as nights of love are, inside our human forest of loss. It is the same everywhere. Ants lay waste ants. Peril lurks ambiguously as it always does in the least or more fertile purposes of the works of human courage. The swamps are treacherous. The hustling creeks of identical water are beautiful and still. One cry, one however begun human cry, contains all.
Rice by Martin Carter. What is rain for, if not rice, for an empty pot? And pot for in a hungry village? The son succeeds his father in the line to count as he did, waiting, adding the latest to the first of his losses. His harvest of quick wind paddy. For him, the new moon was dry like the full moon that promised. The sea always as salt, as wet. In his calculation, his yield was the share that he would reap when he cheated, like the moon and the sea.
Beings of God. Sunlight and dreams disunderstand. And in the sky, which has not yet released the sun, the moon pales. Like the annealing of the sky, blue once, white now, like a lone and laugh world. On the pavements of the feet of cripples, I plant the green pods of the beings of God.
Bent. On the street, the sun rages. The bent back of an old woman resurrects the brimmed bucket of this world's light and insupportable agony, a damage of years. Her bent back, time's bad step, and the creeping out is ash, is the crushed cloud of an incredible want. The last time I saw her, she was far more truthful than the damage of the years carried on her back. The sky, blue and ever, imitates her, bent.
We read in Ground Doves that our time's new wind terrifies the timid ground doves. And we see that it sends them from their habitat of ground cover to the dangerous refuge of electric wires where life is deadly. They perch to perish with singed feathers. They fall, we shall have to pick them up and burn our hands. Carter's initial drafting of these lines reveals the accuracy of language to which he aspired. He first wrote, aghast, time will pick them up. In revising the poem, Carter clarifies the nature of human responsibility that he's interested in here. And it's human responsibility, obligation, and the shared pain that comes with ecological disaster. The costs of our time are felt by all, and it's important, therefore, that we shall pick them up rather than the notion of abstract time. Stanley Greaves's image of miniature figures in this poem are placed on a distant horizon, and it poignantly notices, I think, this relationship. So even as Stanley Greaves is foregrounding the terrifying experience of the doves, we're thinking about the human relationship to them. The fine lines of hatching that typify Greaves's method across the collection become frenzied in this appreciation. The scale of the poem might be a micro environment, but the extremity of the crisis is all encompassing. And in that sense, we all perch to perish. The future in Carter's work is only voiced so far. At the end of Ground Doves, Carter does not intimate what happens after we pick up the dead birds and burn our hands. What remains is poetic ambiguity. In another poem from the collection, Carter closes with these words, "And when I see a green tree, I tremble." Across his work, the colour green is often associated with hope, with life, with renewal. Here, the poet literally shakes like a leaf, connecting human to leaf to tree. However, the connotations of tremble pull us in all sorts of multiple directions, encouraging us maybe to think about anxiety and excitement, frailty perhaps, fear, dread, apprehension. This then is the triumph of Carter's ambiguity. All of these responses must be reckoned with, and the complexities of this shared environment cannot be forgotten.
Ground Doves by Martin Carter. Vile with exhalations, our time's new wind terrifies the timid ground doves. In a swamp of vapors, they seek refuge, as you and I do, above that wind. On electric wires which stretch from nowhere to somewhere, they perch to perish with singed feathers. They fall, and we shall have to pick them up and burn our hands.
Show me a little freedom different from this. Time's tick-tock is our doom's astronomy. Caring too little, our voice betrays the hours we tread upon. Only last night I dreamed a stray dog eagerly as we would devour the kitten. Similarly, in the firmament's disgrace, Orion, the great sky hunter, fled in front of us. Yet I keep watch. Not only their bad hands, but worse eyes I see. Everything blindfolds. Rain and meteors want now, in this season, to surrender their arts of falling.
Being always. Being always to arrange myself in the world and the world in myself. I try to do both. How both are done is difficult. Why, I have to ask, do I have to arrange anything when everything is already arranged by love's and death's inscrutable laws, mortal judiciary, time's dollhouse of replaceable heads, arms, and legs? In another house, not time's, time itself arranges mine and the world's replacement.
Too much waiting. The jumbie umbrella cones the lost dark into an early morning's bright assault. If trees die, what happens to caterpillars? There's much too much waiting in this last of a lost world. When an owl hoots, it warns midnight. The fearing long fixed and dark advice of a Jumbie umbrella, the gone sun's wild memory of a parasol sky.
As Well Is by Martin Carter. Who walks as well is a man seeing identical flaws in the space between light of lost long ago lamps, in the blackouts of bright hopes, tales of candle flies are bright fingernails cutexed with an arrogant despair. Near a leaf, a raindrop pauses over a dead land, a land which can be as much and as bold as an error confused with a cause.
Some kind of fury. On the lintel of my hard mind's and sky's opaque but apparent window, the world's open book, the less green Bible, the insufficient posture which reminds our great God of his function. Southwestern of my long ago childhood are the clouds, which when I was even younger were northeastern. In this foul age of a new and recurring despair, I keep working for a storm, some kind of fury to write new dates in our vile calendar and book.
Inventor by Martin Carter. In a yarning gun world, I am more criminal than any of them. I, inventor of the law I break, am more criminal in the world's definition. The slipper on my foot does not slip. The lace world is a tight thing. I not interruptions. I start insurgencies. But our world is a bowl or a bowel. I shit it out without castor oil. As when in people's grim childhood, I was evacuated.
Your hair in my hand is a rag of wonder. I keep searching to find which one of my many selves has found out why in my hand your hair is a rag of wonder. A dog barks sometimes because it is surprised. Some other times because it is afraid. But whether surprised or afraid, our vile selves refused to search and to find out why love's hair is a rag of wonder, since fear and surprise are foreign to every vile self.
The Sun's Accordion. Fingered by a leaf, wind begins a discussion to which, answering affirmatively, I make every visible to me star a chrysalis. The images are light years, refusing to be held in our dirty hands by daylight comparisoned. As in a night long with waiting, only our love remains for a morning comparable with a sun's work.
There are several pieces in Poems of Affinity that are dedicated to people. Cesar Vallejo was a Peruvian modernist poet who died in 1938. And in the period that Carter was writing Poems of Affinity, he became an attentive reader of Vallejo's work and his experimental language. One of Vallejo's collections is called trilce, a word that he possibly made up from the Spanish words for sad and sweet, triste and dulce, a word holding opposition in tension, which seems very apt for Martin Carter's poetic practice. In For Cesar Vallejo 1, Carter calls out to him, Cesar Vallejo, the parrots call your name, fertile as rain. My habit of utterance kneels down at the sound of it. It is an intimate and expansive form of connection that wants to see generation and fertility where degradation has maybe become the norm. Gordon Rolaire's sharp evaluation of Poems of Affinity sees Martin Carter as a poet, quote, resigned to the barrenness of imagination and the squalor of politics. However, when we recalibrate the collection to consider the human alongside the non-human, another horizon opens up for the future of social action. Carter's eye becomes focused on other kinds of voices that must be heard. His attention at times becomes almost microscopic, and we discover previously obscured environments. In For Cesar Vallejo 2, it is the cockroaches who have more purpose than the humans, knowing their destination better than the we who are in the poem. Carter concludes with these lines, they scorn us, which, I think, is why they flee so many of our dirty houses. The careful pauses created by the commas are important, I think, and they reinforce the care that Carter always takes with language. In his appreciation, Stanley Greaves responds to this reversal of scale. The silhouette of a house recedes into the top right-hand corner as the cockroaches take over the page. But this is not an infestation. The cockroaches have an almost jewel-like shape, like a reimagining of the Egyptian scarab amulets that symbolize renewal and rebirth. In other poems, there are crows, seeds, uprooted trees, a green leaf, owls, toads, seagulls, shrimps, ticks, crabs, ants, paddy, green pods, ground doves, dogs, kittens, jumbie umbrellas, candle flies, parrots, petals, and feathers. And Carter gnomically dedicated Poems of Affinity to, quote, all children, flowers, and dogs in that order. This is not a menagerie for exhibition. Threat, uncertainty, and extremity are never far away, but each life form is respected and connected to the poet within its own context.
For Cesar Vallejo 1. Brother, let us now break our bread together. My plate is a small world. My world is a small plate. From a place in which plates and words are utensils, we have reconstructed ourselves with a power of difference. Cesar Vallejo, the parrots call your name, fertile as rain. My habit of utterance kneels down at the sound of it. I, who only wanted to be and to have a name.
Cesar Vallejo was actually introduced to Martin Carter and myself by Raymond Mandel, who had been studying to do his doctorate in Spanish. I think it was at the University of Texas. And when he came back, he said, "Have you ever heard of this poet?" He said, "No." And he started to read, and we were totally entranced. Or as Shakespeare would say, we were totally entranced. And so we started reading his poems. Poem number 2 for Cesar Vallejo by Martin Carter. Proud of being coarse, we coarse in pride, making the act an issue. Even cockroaches have begun to flee from some of our very dirty houses. They, knowing better their inevitable destination, better than many of us do, flaunt their insect pride, less coarse than ours. They scorn us, which, I think, is why they flee so many of our dirty houses.
Bastille Day, Georgetown. Not wanting to deny, I believed it. Not wanting to believe it, I denied our Bastille Day. This is nothing to storm, this 14th of July. With my own eyes, I saw the fierce criminal passing for citizen with a weapon, a piece of wood, and 5 for 1. We laugh Bastille laughter. These are not men of death. A pot of rice is their foul reward. I have at last started to understand the origin of our vileness. And being unable to deny it, I suggest its nativity. In the shame of knowledge of our vileness, we shall fight
A poem entitled Let Every Child Run Wild. No need to throw a flower, throw a petal. Rain is a cousin of air, the blood of parents. Let every child run wild, or stop the way men journey through the earth's loop, the freedom of a guitar. As much or much more delicate is the freedom of a such instrument. This day is an old one. It is as old as a petal or a flower, or the rain, or the still air of a child's wild guitar shuddering in the silence of parents.
I Tremble by Martin Carter. Accursed, I curse, with a green lip for a new mouth, a green and wider pencil for a finger, and a freer and much more dreadful season for a climate. Almost everywhere I have wandered, often died and dreamed myself back to mortality. Still, everything remains a peculiar yet. Death and dreams are warm, but also as cold as the curses I utter about myself. Often, I repeat, I have died and dreamed, and when I see a green tree, I tremble.
This poem is entitled Census. Use the true mathematic in a real counting. Indict about strays and such as those them. Include the new others, the big ones, the not so big ones, that very big one too. Then indict, then add up. Smaller count, ampler measure, true mathematic. Is why. Same only ghost come to suffice, all lost in air, ground, house, and incomparable city of false directions. Was real, was true, is why. Not as these undead, and about time too. Same walk about ghost, about time too.